Hey, Rich here again with a tip on brake pedal height and adjustment, along with some other brake tips. I went to a local enduro this past weekend and just kind of brought back up to me some issues a lot of people have riding tight woods a lot of times, enduro riders in particular, where you're on and off your brake pedal constantly. Some braking tips that I have that may help you. I was always a brake dragger back in the day, but I've since broke that habit because I had a habit of riding the brake, riding my foot over it all the time. I don't ride my foot over it, and a lot of it has to do with my adjustment. It's a trade-off, and I understand it's a trade-off. But we're going to take some time and talk about your brake pedal adjustment and give you some tips on the brake pedal itself to kind of help with that aspect if you are a brake dragger, and some other things as far as to help with heat and stuff like that. So just bear with me, and we're going to get her done, give you some cool tips. Okay, so brake pedal adjustment as far as the height and where it engages at and stuff like that. For me, I run the brake pedal like a moto adjustment. The height is above the foot peg, slightly above the foot peg, and it engages or gets taut where there's brake just about level with the foot peg. A lot of guys, woods guys who ride with their foot on the brake, they tend to run their brake pedal really low, especially if they're a sit down guy. You're more of a sit down guy, you ride with your foot constantly on the brake pedal. Your foot's on the foot peg, hovering over the brake pedal. A lot of times if it's adjusted high like I'm talking about, you can't do that because you'd have to keep your foot up off the foot peg, hovering over it. So a lot of guys want to ride with their foot on the foot peg and then therefore hovering over the brake pedal, so they run it super low. I don't particularly like that. It's how I used to ride. One, because if you run with it really super low like that, then in an instance when you have to stand up coming into a turn over braking bumps or stuff like that, you can't find the brake pedal. You have to lean so far forward to find the brake pedal. The trade-off is when you run it high and where it's good standing, when you go to sit, as I mentioned, my foot's here. As I go to use the brake pedal, my foot's off to the side of it. As I use it sitting down, my foot is actually like this, off the foot peg, against the case, pressure against the case. Most of my pressure is against the case, and then finding the brake pedal and using that pressure like you would on the front brake. Just pressure. You don't want to lock it up. You just want to apply pressure to it so that you don't lock up the rear wheel. Something that a lot of people have issues with. Another precaution that I use, if you noticed already, that really helps, one of the biggest things that I do is run two brake springs. Return brake springs. Why? For a simple fact that it helps me have a better feel of the brake pedal. Better feel, because obviously it's a stiffer spring, so there's more tension on that brake pedal. You can feel it a lot more in your foot. For a guy who's a brake dragger, meaning he stands with he sits with his foot over the brake pedal, and a lot of times you don't even realize your foot's on the brake pedal. Running two brake springs will help you with that. So it gives it more feel, it's stiffer, it's harder to push on, but a lot of times if you're a brake dragger, it will help you drag it less. Like I said, I run it kind of high. I also run a brake snake. You can see the brake snake in here. I just anchor it to one of the bolts with a bracket. My bracket actually is just the something I've used for years, is the backing plate or to a master link. Just kind of drill it out a little bit so an 8mm shoulder bolt fits through it. The shoulder fits through it. It fastens. You use the other end, the other hole, the master link to, put the brake snake through, and then through to the brake pedal. This is a Tusk brake pedal. Something different. I haven't ran one. This is the first time I've run one just this past race. And the simple reason is just because it was cheaper than OEM. But it seems to be lasting. It does stick out a little bit further, which I didn't like at first, than an OEM brake pedal. It seems to stick out and be a little bit more vulnerable. But also, and it's got a lot of hardware, but it's because the tip actually flexes. So, but I mean, a like it or not, and it seems to be working, and it is cheaper. And definitely anchor it in, run a brake snake, especially if you're riding in deep woods with a lot of vegetation, a lot of debris, stuff like that. Brake snake is definitely the way to go. Make sure that when you put the brake snake on, you leave, let the brake snake do its job to keep debris and everything out, but leave some slack. You gotta leave some slack in it, so, as your brake wear goes down, or if you have an issue, and it gets some play in the brake pedal, that it's not taut, meaning too taut, the brake snake's too taut and not letting you actuate the brake. So be sure of that. And like I said, the double brake spring, I use another bracket. This is, I don't know, I found this bracket here, but like I mentioned with the brake snake, another bracket you can make is just using the backing plate to a master link. Drill the hole out a little bit so the 8mm fits through it, and then use the other end to hook the spring in. And then I recommend, you could run the brake spring, the other end of it, through the same hole, but I recommend just drilling another hole. And I just run them side by side, and that's a little more taut, but a lot less brake dragging happens when you do this, and just helps me a lot more. Now it's funny because, like I mentioned, guys that ride with their foot on the brake pedal and drag it a lot, and their answer is, oh, I gotta lower the brake pedal more, lower the brake pedal more, lower the brake pedal more. The more they lower it, you're just still dragging it, and then you can't find it. So for me, the cure of fixing my brake dragging issue was raising it up to a moto standard where it's high and it gets taut, like I said, or it gets brake right level with the foot peg. So it just forced me to ride with my foot off of it, not hover over it so much, on and off of it, on and off, on and off. So my foot was sliding to the side, and then when I needed it, slid it back over, and used the brake. So I ride with my foot more on the ball a lot of times, out of the way of the brake pedal, rather than hovering over it all the time. As far as precautions for, heat and stuff like that, you want to use high temp fluid. I know a lot of guys use like Motul, and I think it's a 5.0 rating or something like that, high heat. You definitely want to use high heat brake fluid, Motul, like I said, Bel-Ray. Stay away from anything silicone based. As far as bleeding your brakes, every race, dude, gotta bleed them every race. I know a lot of guys that have brake issues and they never bleed their brakes. Brake fluid, once it gets hot, it loses, its effectiveness. So you gotta bleed it regularly. At an enduro, I bleed mine after every test just because I'm on them so much, on and off, on and off, on and off. Precaution, definitely don't run an OEM stock brake line. Enduro Engineering or Gaffer or anybody like that, aftermarket brake line is best. A lot of times with the OEM ones, right here where the plastic coating over the braiding, when they crimp them back here, when they crimp them, they actually crimp it on the plastic coating, so it's not into the braiding. And a lot of times it'll get hot. The coating gets hot, and where it's not crimped on the actual braided part, it'll pull away. So I've had them pull out of there. I'm sure if anybody's shaking their head thinking, yeah, I've had that happen. When they crimp them, you gotta make sure they're crimped on the braided part of the line, not on the plastic. Crimp on the plastic. As soon as that gets hot, it pulls out of there like nothing, and then you have no brakes. Been there, done that. Solid rear disc, either mostly Enduro Engineering is the ones I run, but a lot of times I hear guys say, you run it all the time, or oh, you just run it in the mud, or I run it all the time because of the fact of heat. Any of the braking or brake testing we've done in the past for heat, the solid rotor was best, and the simple answer is because it has more surface area for the heat to dissipate. A lot of guys will say, oh, you gotta run it slotted because the slotted, brings in air. I've never ever been going fast enough in the woods to where that actually occurs. There's no way for air to get in there like that in the woods, in my opinion, and those little bit of vents, I know they put them in there for mud and stuff like that, in my opinion, to drop mud away, but in that retrospect, I think it acts as a cheese grater. A lot of times when that's there, it gets a little bit of an edge on it, and it works at your brake pads even more. So I run a solid brake rotor all the time in the rear. DP pads, the MX pads, not the full-on metallics, the MX ones, because they generate a little less heat, a little less metal in them, but they last. You know, and I always run, instead of, you know, Husky KTM, the clip, the stock clip, and I remove one of the clips and use safety wire, because I've had these clips come out before, and I don't like the ones that just clip over, the fancy ones that just kind of go through and then clip over. I've had them pop up before too. So stock pin, the little safety pin, I run stock, just one of them, and the other end is safety wire. Just keeps it in there, keeps it from falling out. Heat sink shields. I've had guys, you gotta run a heat sink shield, you gotta run a heat sink shield. Well, a lot of times I've always had issues with them because of the simple fact it keeps all the heat at the brake pad. A lot of times it keeps all the heat at the brake pad. The glue that holds the actual metal part of the pad to the braking part of the pad, you know, they're glued together. That heat gets it so hot that the glue, you know, becomes no good, and then all of a sudden the pad just falls apart. 9 times out of 10 it was when I run a heat sink shield or heat shield. You see there's a little asbestos shields or stainless steel shield that kind of shields all the heat, but it keeps it right at the pad. A lot of times if it's going to get hot, I want it to dissipate throughout the caliper, throughout the rotor and everything. A lot of times if you have more, like I said, surface area, when I was talking about the rotor, it'll help the heat dissipate more. So just running a heat sink shield right here, a lot of times, in my opinion, is not a good thing. That's my opinion, and I'm just going by what I've always had issues with in the past. Always check your axle nut. Axle nut being on this side, a lot of times heat and stuff, I've had them come loose. If it gets hot and down into your swing arm, down into the axle, a lot of times this will be loose all of a sudden. Or I've had guys look down and say, man, I lost my axle nut. How in the heck, you know? And simply, it's just a lot of times guys just forget to tighten their axle nut, but you can't forget to do that. But a lot of times I think it's just due to heat. It heats up and loosens up on you. Got to run a, you know, Endurance Engineering, again, like I said, they make a lot of good products, but shark fin, if you're in the rocks, roots, stuff like that, you've got to run a shark fin to protect that rotor. You bend your rotor, your day's screwed, because you're going to spend the rest of the day pumping up your brakes before you go to use it. So got to run a good shark fin. Don't use an OEM brake line. Good brake pads, DP brake pads, solid rotor, high temperature heat, bleed them once a race, brake pedal height I've already talked about, and doubling up on your brake spring. Make sure you run a, like I said, a brake snake is what we've always called them back in the day. Brake anchor, I've heard people call it, or whatever, but a brake snake to kind of keep debris and everything from coming behind your brake pedal and pulling it out, and hopefully keeping it from being bent around your foot peg, because I've done that more than once. But another thing is too, I've had, talk about heat and your axle coming loose, I've had the banjo bolt come loose before. Keep an eye on your banjo bolts, always check them. I've had them come loose before and had issues with it. You know, and be careful how you tighten it or whatever. You want it to kind of, you want it tight, but don't break it off. So just be snug with it, but always check it. Check the banjo bolt here, banjo bolt here. The banjo bolt is what goes through the actual brake line. And that's it. So there you go. Some tips on your braking and stuff like that. Hope that kind of helps with things. And like I said, we're gonna keep on rolling these and stuff. And you know, I've gave an explanation of why I run a solid rotor all the time. Slider rotor, really no use for it in the rear. All right, man. Thanks, guys. Talk to you soon. Later.